Some people face life-altering challenges and experiences at a young age that make them grow up faster than their peers. I was one of those people. By the time I was only 18 years old, my life was already so complicated that it felt as though I had lived decades. I had become the caretaker of a family, responsible for the well-being of not just myself, but also for others. My choices and circumstances led me down a path I knew was not ideal, yet I felt trapped by my environment and upbringing. My mother, despite the challenges she faced, had secured me a factory job with great difficulty. She had high hopes for me, placing her trust in my ability to support the household. At first, it was a daunting experience. I had never worked before, and stepping into a job was intimidating. But I quickly realized that it was necessary. We didn't have the financial resources to survive comfortably without my contribution. Still, my father and brothers were furious when they found out. Their outdated sense of pride and honor left no room for me to work. My father even hit my mother when he discovered that she had supported my decision to take the job. He demanded that she stop sending me to work immediately. But I had made up my mind. No matter what happened, I would continue to work. Our household desperately needed the money. Without my small income, there would be no way to afford my mother's medications or meet even our basic needs. My father and brothers, however, refused to understand. Their stubbornness and misplaced sense of family honor made my life unbearable. I was constantly on edge, worried about how they would react next. Their oppressive behavior often left me feeling suffocated. There were moments when I wanted to run away from home entirely, to escape the relentless control and verbal abuse. But I knew that running away wasn't an option. In our village, women who defied societal norms were met with brutal punishments. Women who ran away or pursued relationships outside of their family's approval were subjected to unimaginable cruelty. I had seen this firsthand. My aunt had chosen to marry a man she loved, defying her father and brothers. The result was horrific. Her family killed the man in public, shooting him in the middle of the street, and then tied my aunt to a tree and stoned her to death. Her mother and sisters could only watch in helpless agony. No one dared speak up. Even my own mother and grandmother, who cried for days, could do nothing to stop the violence. The men in the family saw themselves as absolute rulers, unchallenged in their decisions. That memory stayed with me. I knew that if I tried to escape, I could face a similar fate. Still, the desire for freedom burned inside me. I was a young woman who longed to live life on her own terms, free from the suffocating grip of my father and brothers. Yet, the fear of retribution kept me in line. The only person who stood by me was my mother. She saw the truth of our situation and recognized that we needed a way out of our financial struggles. She remained my anchor, the one person who understood my pain and supported my decisions. The harsh reality of our household only made matters worse. My father had suffered heavy losses in his business and was frequently unwell. My brother, instead of stepping up, spent his days aimlessly wandering the village with his friends, contributing nothing. The burden of running the household fell squarely on my mother's shoulders. There were days when she had to borrow food for lunch, then borrow again to make dinner. Watching her struggle broke my heart. I couldn't bear to see her beg and scrape just to put food on the table. That's why I insisted on taking the job, despite the resistance from my father and brothers. It was the only way I could help ease my mother's burden and provide some stability for our family. On my first day at the factory, I was nervous but determined. I knew I had to succeed. However, the next day, everything changed. My father and brother found out about my job, and the house erupted in chaos. They made it clear that under no circumstances would I be allowed to work. Their voices were loud, their anger overwhelming. They were unwilling to see reason. But I refused to back down. I knew that if I stopped working, our family would fall into even deeper despair. My mother and I both understood that I had no choice. Over time, I began to adjust to my new reality. I learned the ins and outs of my job, and while the work was tiring, it gave me a sense of independence. I started to save money for my mother's medication, and I could buy small necessities for myself. This newfound self-reliance gave me strength. Still, the constant battle with my father and brother wore me down. Their harsh words and oppressive rules reminded me every day of the uphill battle I faced. In those moments of hardship, I clung to the support of my mother. She was the only one who believed in me and stood by my side. Together, we faced the challenges, tried to make the best of a difficult situation. Though the road was not easy, I learned that resilience and determination could help me navigate even the most trying circumstances. My struggles made me stronger, and I carried the hope that one day I would be able to carve out a life of my own, free from the constraints of societal and familial expectations. I can't go to work, I told myself quietly, but deep down, I knew that if I didn't, my family wouldn't survive. In our household, it was practically unheard of for women to earn a living. It simply wasn't allowed. However, my mother, for the first time in her life, stood up against my father. With frustration and anger in her voice, she shouted, "Neither you nor your aimless son is doing anything. If I don't send her to work, we'll all starve to death. How long are we supposed to live off of borrowed money? One day, even those who lend us food will stop." Her words were true, but my father refused to listen. Instead, he became enraged and began hitting her. I watched helplessly as he lashed out. Thankfully, for the first time, my brother's sense of honor seemed to awaken, and he intervened. He pulled my father away from my mother and told him enough was enough. Still, my father didn't let me leave the house for work for several days. It wasn't until he himself began to feel the full weight of our financial troubles that he reluctantly allowed me to go. With a heavy heart, he gave me permission. It wasn't an enthusiastic approval, but it was enough. Every day, I would take the bus to a factory far from our home. The journey was long, but it was the only option. I wasn't alone. A few other women from the area worked at the same factory, including the daughter of one of my mother's closest friends. Because of that, my mother wasn't too worried about me. She trusted me, too. I was always a cautious and strong-willed person. On my very first day, riding the bus, I felt a strange sensation, like someone's eyes were burning into my back. I became uneasy, shifting in my seat and glancing around. But no matter how much I looked, I couldn't catch anyone staring at me. It felt like my imagination. With a quick shake of my head, I brushed it off and turned to look out the window again. Eventually, the factory came into view, and I got off the bus with the other girls. After work, we'd all take the same bus back home. That became our daily routine. I quickly grew accustomed to the factory work, which wasn't too demanding, and I started to feel a bit more at ease. 2 weeks passed without any major issues. Then, one day, as I settled into my seat on the bus, something caught my eye. The driver, a man of about 55, was staring at me through the rearview mirror. His gaze was intense, fixed, and unwavering. He was tall, with fair skin and a beard tinged with gray. His large eyes were lined with coal, giving him a piercing look. At first, I was taken aback. I looked at him for a brief moment, then quickly turned away, trying to shake off the discomfort. But his stare continued. At first, I thought I was imagining it again. I tried to focus on the scenery outside, but I couldn't shake the feeling of his eyes following me. Every time I glanced at the mirror, he was still looking at me. My discomfort grew. Finally, I shot him a sharp glare, silently telling him to stop. But he didn't. He just kept staring, bold and shameless. Anger and unease boiled inside me. I couldn't stay seated in that spot any longer. Quietly, I got up and moved to a corner seat farther away. My friend Neelam, sitting beside me, noticed my sudden movement and gave me a questioning look. After a moment, she stood up and followed me. "Sonia, why did you come here?" she asked, concern in her voice. We were sitting so comfortably up front, and the breeze was nice. "Is something wrong?" I glanced at her briefly and then leaned back against my new seat, closing my eyes. My silence made it clear that I wasn't in the mood to talk. Neelam didn't press me further. She knew me well enough to understand that when I was quiet, it meant I needed time to think. I always stayed cautious in everything I did because I knew how quickly people's behavior could change. In our society, where women were judged so harshly for the smallest of actions, any misstep could lead to consequences far greater than one might expect. I wasn't going to let that happen. I had to be careful always. Even something as simple as a bus ride could turn into a moment of unease, a test of my resilience, and a reminder that I needed to stay vigilant. No one knew about it. A friend can be a wonderful thing, but a person should never trust someone so completely that they begin sharing their private matters with strangers. I had always been the type of girl who kept to herself. At most, I'd share my thoughts with my mother, but I didn't like talking about my personal issues with anyone else. The bus had only traveled a short distance when we reached my stop. Neelam and I got off together. On the walk home, she kept asking me what was wrong, but I didn't answer. I stayed silent. Even when we neared my house, she asked again. I couldn't hold back my frustration and snapped at her. Neelam, sensing my anger, went quiet. When I walked into the house, my mother was in the kitchen making bread, while my father sat on the charpoy, smoking a cigarette. As soon as she saw me, my mother smiled warmly, but my father turned his face away in disdain. I didn't let it bother me. I had grown up seeing this dynamic. My father hated us. He had always resented women, treating us as if we were a burden. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the driver's strange, persistent gaze. Those eyes followed me all the way home, lingering in my mind as I tried to fall asleep. It made for a restless night. Somehow, I managed to get through it. The next morning, I boarded the bus again and headed to the factory. Once more, the driver's eyes were glued to me. It was as if I were the only person in the bus. It made me uncomfortable. His stare wasn't just a passing glance. It was intense, fixed, and far from appropriate. I wanted to confront him, but I also didn't want to cause a scene. So I kept my composure and stared straight ahead, pretending he wasn't there. The days passed, and my first paycheck arrived. It felt like a small miracle. Our financial situation at home began to improve. For the first time in ages, we could eat 2 meals a day without worrying. Even my mother's medical expenses became easier to manage. This relief made me more confident in my decision to work, despite the initial resistance from my family. But that man, the bus driver, was still there every morning and evening, watching me. His focus never wavered. He never looked at any of the other girls, only me. This attention unsettled me, but at the same time, a part of me couldn't help but notice it. After all, who doesn't want to be noticed? In a way, it was flattering, and as the days went on, I found myself thinking about it more and more. At home, the only attention I ever received from the men in my life was yelling or scolding. My father and brother never showed affection or care. They only made me feel small and unworthy. Compared to that, the driver's persistent gaze felt different, something that, against my better judgment, began to appeal to me. Over time, I started to look for him in the mirror, catching his eyes whenever I could. Without realizing it, I began to like the attention. I knew these feelings weren't right. Deep down, I tried to suppress them. I told myself it was just the result of my circumstances, years of neglect and harsh treatment. I didn't want to entertain the thought that I could be drawn to a stranger. So I pushed those feelings down, keeping them buried. One morning, as I prepared to leave for work, my mother offered a prayer for my safety and success. On my way out, I decided to pick up Neelam. She always came to get me from my house, walking me to the bus stop. She was kind that way. Neelam was more than a friend. She was someone who looked out for me when no one else did. Often, she'd use her own money to buy me snacks from the canteen, even though I tried to pay her back. She never accepted it. She understood my family's struggles and helped without making me feel uncomfortable. But even though she was so supportive, I never opened up to her about my personal issues. I didn't feel comfortable discussing my family problems with anyone, not even her. I valued her friendship and her help, but I kept my thoughts and feelings private. When I arrived at Neelam's house that day, her mother met me at the door. "Neelam isn't feeling well today," she said with concern. "She won't be going to the factory." Worried, I asked if I could see her. "I just want to check on her before I leave for work," I explained. Her mother sighed and shook her head. "She's resting. I just gave her some medicine, and it's best not to wake her. Come see her tonight instead." Reluctantly, I agreed. I didn't want to disturb Neelam if she was unwell, so I turned around and began my walk to the bus stop alone. I found myself agreeing with her reasoning. A sick, person finds it hard enough to rest, and waking them wouldn't do any good. I nodded in approval and decided not to disturb Neelam. With that settled, I headed straight for the bus stop. Today, for the first time, I was alone. As I climbed aboard, I chose the seat right next to the driver, sitting quietly. His eyes lit up when he noticed. There were fewer passengers than usual, and most of them sat toward the back of the bus. I was the only one near the front. The driver cast a glance my way and said, "What an honor it is to finally see you up close. Usually, I only catch a glimpse of you through the mirror." His words caught me off guard. Though he was a Pashtun, his Urdu was impeccable, his manner of speaking smooth and charming. I looked at him and replied, "I felt like seeing you up close today, so I sat here. If it's a problem, I can move to the back." As soon as I said this, he quickly shook his head. No, not at all. You've misunderstood me. I didn't mean it like that. I'm just happy to finally have you sitting here." He smiled, trying to reassure me. I let out a faint smile in response. Before he could say anything else, more passengers began boarding the bus, forcing me to move back to another seat. Even as I relocated, I couldn't help but notice a strange smile spreading across my face. I didn't fully understand what was happening, but I realized I felt different. I was forgetting, or perhaps choosing to ignore, the fact that he was 55 years old and I was only 18. When misfortune begins knocking at one's door, it's as if no amount of effort can keep it closed until it's meant to be shut. And that's exactly what was happening to me. Time passed, and our connection grew deeper. I began to lose the shyness and modesty that had once defined me. Eventually, the driver gave me his number and even slipped me a small mobile phone so we could stay in constant contact. He would arrive early at the factory just to pick me up and would be waiting for me at the bus stop long before my shift ended. He wouldn't start the bus until I boarded. This became our routine, where once I used to rush to the bus stop, afraid I might miss it. Now, I took my time, knowing full well he'd be there waiting. The two of us would spend hours talking late into the night. His words, his attention, it all made me feel special in a way I never had before. Then one day, he brought up the subject of marriage. "I want to marry you," he said. "How long can we continue like this? I want you to be mine. I want to get lost in your beauty. Every time I see you, I have this longing to hold you, to be close to you. But you know we Pashtun never touch anyone who isn't lawful for us. That's why I want to make you mine through marriage and bring you into my home as my wife." His words were both flattering and overwhelming. A part of me felt drawn to him, yet I was fully aware of the reality of my situation. My mother would never agree to such a union. My father would never accept a man of his age for his young daughter. And it wasn't just my parents. I knew what the people in my village were capable of. If anyone found out that I was involved with someone, let alone someone much older, they wouldn't just disapprove. They would take action. I had seen it happen before. I knew exactly what would befall me if this secret were to come to light. I remember the story of my aunt. She had dared to choose a husband for herself. Her mother had no objections, but her father and brothers couldn't stand the thought of her marrying a man of her choosing. They killed him right there in the village square, shooting him twice in front of everyone. Then they tied her to a tree and stoned her to death. The memory haunted me, a constant reminder of what could happen if I crossed the line of tradition and honor. These fears kept me awake at night. The thought of being humiliated or even killed filled me with dread. I knew that agreeing to marry him would mean going against my family, my culture, and the strict rules of my village. So, despite the growing feelings I had for him, I turned him down. "I can't be in any kind of relationship with you," I said firmly. "We should stay just friends." But I could sense that his intentions had shifted and that he wasn't ready to accept such a boundary. One day, on the way home, Neelam wasn't with me. She often took days off, and that day was no different. The bus driver had already dropped off the other passengers and, in some cases, hadn't even picked up certain stops. My house wasn't far from the current stop, but suddenly I realized that the bus was completely empty. He was driving on without saying a word, and I started to feel uneasy. His gaze lingered on me in a way that made me uncomfortable. What once had felt flattering, when he would simply watch me in the mirror, now felt menacing. Ever since he had proposed marriage, his persistent looks had started to bother me. Caught up in these thoughts, I didn't even notice when he turned off the usual route. By the time I looked out the window, I realized we were no longer in my neighborhood. The area looked unfamiliar, desolate, and overrun with trees. It felt as if we were in the middle of a forest. My heart began to race. The once familiar surroundings were gone, replaced by a strange and eerie landscape. I stood up, panic rising in my chest. "Where are you taking me?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "This isn't my neighborhood. I need to get home. My mother must be waiting for me." He said nothing at first. Then, with a sudden screech of brakes, he stopped the bus. Slowly, he stood up and began walking toward me. With each step he took, my breathing grew faster. Fear coursed through my veins. "Stop," I pleaded. "Don't come any closer." But he continued moving toward me. There was no one else on the bus. The world outside felt impossibly far away, as though no one could hear me if I screamed. I tried to move toward the bus door, but before I could reach it, he grabbed my wrist and shoved me onto the back seat. His weight pinned me down, and I struggled, kicking and twisting to free myself. But he was too strong. He was a grown man, almost 3 times my age, and I was just an 18-year-old girl. My strength wasn't enough to fight him off. I screamed and tried to push him away, but his grip was ironclad. Minutes passed like hours as I tried in vain to resist. His hold on me was so tight, so suffocating, that it felt as though he believed he owned me. He didn't just overpower me physically. He crushed my sense of control, of safety. When he finally pulled away, it was abrupt. Without a word, he scrambled back to the driver's seat, leaving.